November 16, 1957. In the small town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, there was a hardware store owned by an elderly woman named Bernice Warden. Whenever the townspeople needed anything, they came here. Everyone in town knew Bernice well. Her son, Frank Warden, was the deputy sheriff of Plainfield. On the evening of November 16th, when Frank arrived at the store around 5 o'clock, he found the closed sign hanging on the door. This surprised him greatly, because the store was never closed at this hour. The door was unlocked, so he assumed his mother must be working inside. But the moment he stepped in, what he saw stopped him cold. Fresh blood stains were scattered across the floor. On the gun rack, a .22 caliber rifle was missing from its place. And at the back door, there were drag marks on the ground. Someone had been pulled out. Everything pointed to one thing. Something terrible had happened here. Local Sheriff Arthur Schley was immediately informed. Plainfield was a town of only 700 people, where crime was almost unheard of. So this scene was truly terrifying, made even worse by the fact that the victim was the deputy sheriff's own mother. Sheriff Arthur Schley arrived at the store without delay and began his investigation. Inside the store, there was a logbook where customer purchases were recorded. When they flipped through the pages, the last entry was from a man named Ed Gein, who had come in to buy antifreeze. The townspeople had always considered Ed Gein a bit simple. He rarely spoke and seemed lost in his own world most of the time. He lived alone in a large farmhouse on the outskirts of town. In everyone's eyes, he was a harmless, odd man who just didn't quite understand the world around him. Since Ed Gein was the last known person to visit the store before Bernice disappeared, Sheriff Schley and Frank Warden decided to pay him a visit. When they arrived at the old, rundown farmhouse, there was a strange heaviness in the air. Ed Gein was nowhere to be seen, but the front door was open. They called out his name several times, but got no answer. So they went inside. The moment they stepped through the door, something felt deeply wrong. The feeling was so overwhelming that Sheriff Arthur Schley stepped back outside and vomited. After a few minutes, he and Frank Warden forced themselves back in. What they found inside was enough to shatter anyone's sanity. As the beam of their flashlights swept across the dark rooms, the first thing they saw was a human skull, and then another. Some were left as they were, while others had been shaped and repurposed as everyday objects. But that was nothing compared to what came next. As the two officers moved deeper into the house, their feet nearly gave out beneath them. The decorations in the house were not made of wood or cloth. They were made of human skin and bones. Things hanging on the walls, things stuffed in cupboards, things sitting in the corners. Everything was crafted from human remains. Belts and other items in a cupboard had been made the same way. On all four corners of Ed Gein's bed sat real human skulls, arranged as if they were part of some dark ritual. And in one corner of the room, there were several masks. When the sheriff looked closely at one of the masks, he stopped breathing. It was the face of Mary Hogan, a woman who had gone missing back in 1954. This alone was enough to shake a person to their core. But what they found in the kitchen was even more disturbing. Human body parts were in a state that no one could have imagined. Some parts were boiling in a pot on the stove. In the refrigerator, the private parts of 9 different women were found stored away. During the search, police also discovered a woman's suit, which made Sheriff Schley shudder. It had been stitched together from the skin of different women, with one purpose: to wear it and become a woman. Everything in that house made the officers feel as though they were standing in a hallway of hell itself. But what was Ed Gein's connection to all of this? This man that the whole town considered quiet and harmless. What dark secrets had his past been hiding? And most urgently, what had happened to Deputy Sheriff Frank Warden's mother, Bernice Warden? Was her disappearance a coincidence? Or was she the final piece of this nightmare? Let's go back to the beginning of a story that pushes the limits of human understanding. Ed Gein's full name was Edward Theodore Gein. He was born on August 27, 1906, in La Crosse, Wisconsin. He lived with his father George Gein, his mother Augusta Gein, and his older brother Henry George Gein. Ed Gein's childhood was nothing short of a nightmare. His father was a heavy drinker who would come home drunk and beat both his wife and his children. His mother, Augusta Gein, on the other hand, was a deeply religious woman, strict, rigid, and uncompromising in her beliefs. She refused to divorce George despite his abuse, seeing the marriage as a sacred obligation, even though she despised him bitterly. Her hatred ran so deep that when she was pregnant, she did not want another son. When Henry was born first, and then Ed, she made it clear, in her own cruel way, that she considered his very birth a sin. There are very few children in this world whose own mother hates them. Ed Gein was one of them. From childhood, he was constantly put down, mocked, and punished harshly for the smallest mistakes. Augusta was terrified of the outside world. She believed that evil lurked around every corner, ready to consume her family. Convinced that city life was full of filth and sin, she moved the entire family to a small, isolated town called Plainfield. And even there, she chose a remote farmhouse far from the main part of town, because she feared that if her sons mixed with other people, it would corrupt their souls. Because of this isolation, the only world her sons knew was her voice. She read the Bible to them for hours every day, but never spoke of love, kindness, or peace. Her stories were always about sin, hellfire, and death. She drilled these ideas so deep into Ed Gein's mind that they became part of who he was. In that Plainfield farmhouse, Ed Gein grew up surrounded by his mother's hatred and cruelty. Whenever he tried to speak to a girl, Augusta would lock him in his room for hours. She controlled every part of his life. His older brother Henry was less affected by their mother's influence. Despite her dominance, he managed to keep some connection to the outside world. He even had a relationship with a widow in town and was planning to move in with her. But Ed Gein's entire world revolved around his mother. He could not ignore a single word she said. The only time Ed left the farmhouse without his mother was to go to school. But even there, he could not fit in. His upbringing had taught him that everyone outside was impure and dangerous. He would sometimes say strange things in class that made no sense to others. Because of his behavior, he was regularly bullied. And when he came home, there was no comfort waiting for him, only more cruelty from Augusta. By the time he finished 8th grade, Ed Gein had given up on school entirely. Years passed, and his life shrank to the walls of that farmhouse. In the early 1940s, when Ed was around 33 years old, his alcoholic father George Gein died. With their father gone, both brothers took on the responsibility of running the household. They worked on the family farm and took on small handyman jobs around town, fixing windows, repairing roofs, painting walls, mending fences. Henry, the older brother, was also a handyman. He followed his mother's rules to some extent, but he never fully believed in them. He kept in touch with the outside world, had a relationship, and was quietly planning to leave. But in 1944, that plan ended forever. One day, Henry and Ed were burning brush around the farmhouse when the fire got out of control. Henry didn't make it out in time, and he died. What was suspicious, however, was that his death was ruled as suffocation, with no autopsy, even though he had a severe head injury that was simply ignored. After losing both his father and brother, Ed Gein was devastated. But his mother's grip on him never loosened. During this time, Ed spent hours reading. He had a large collection of books and magazines filled with stories about World War II, particularly about the horrors of Nazi concentration camps. He read about the inhuman treatment of prisoners, about experiments conducted on human bodies. These images and ideas settled deep into his mind. From the outside, he still looked simple and harmless. But inside, a terrible storm was building, one that only needed a single spark to ignite. That spark came in December 1945, when his beloved mother Augusta suffered a stroke and died. Her death shattered him completely. He could not imagine a single day without her. The emptiness she left behind was impossible to fill. He would sit for hours beside her empty bed. To the people of Plainfield, Ed Gein was just a poor orphan. But inside those silent farmhouse walls, he was mentally broken beyond repair. He turned the house into a kind of shrine to his mother. He sealed off the rooms she had used and moved into a small bedroom near the kitchen. He spoke to almost no one. He spent most of his time alone, inside. And in those dark, isolated days, he began to hear whispers. Whether it was delusion or the beginning of madness, 18 months after his mother's death, Ed Gein picked up a pickaxe and a shovel one night and walked straight to the cemetery. In the darkness, he dug up his mother's grave. His hands didn't tremble. When he pried open the coffin and saw her decaying body, he felt a strange sense of peace. He removed her head, brought it home, and would sit beside it for hours, talking to her, convinced she was only sleeping and would soon wake up and hold him again. But even that wasn't enough. He missed her too much. He wanted her back. He wanted to feel her presence on his own body. And so a disturbing idea took root in his mind. If he could build a suit that looked like his mother, he could wear it and feel like she was still there. To make that suit, he needed human skin. And this is where the grave robbing began. The obsession that would turn an ordinary, broken man into the butcher of Plainfield. He returned to the cemetery again and again, digging up corpses, bringing them home, and carefully removing their skin. He would dry it, tan it, and sew it. Piece by piece, he assembled his suit, along with other items. Chairs upholstered in human skin, gloves, purses, things he had read about in his magazines and books. Then, in 1954, he took his first living victim. He went to a bar in town, owned by a woman named Mary Hogan. Her face reminded him of his mother. She knew Ed Gein and served him a drink. It was closing time, and the two of them were alone. The moment Mary turned away to tend to something, Ed Gein shot her in the head. He loaded her into his pickup truck and took her home, where he did to her body what he had been doing to the others. Mary Hogan's disappearance caused a stir in Plainfield because crime there was so rare. But the investigation went nowhere. No one could imagine that such a quiet, dim man could kill anyone. Ed Gein was never even considered a suspect. He continued walking freely through the town, hiding the darkest truth behind the most ordinary face. And he kept going. But on November 16, 1957, when Bernice Warden disappeared and police came to his farmhouse, Ed Gein's mask finally slipped. For the first time, the world saw what he truly was. What Sheriff Arthur Schley and Deputy Frank Warden had seen inside that house had shaken them to their core. The sheriff immediately called for backup. The entire police force was now searching for Bernice Warden. Frank Warden's gut told him the worst. After everything they had found in that farmhouse, the fear was eating him alive, that Ed Gein had done to his mother what he had done to the others. Despite everything, Frank held himself together and kept searching. And then it happened. Bernice Warden's body was found inside the farmhouse. For a son, seeing his mother like that, there is no greater trauma in the world. Frank was still reeling from the shock when a pickup truck pulled up to the farmhouse. Ed Gein was behind the wheel. He stepped out slowly, looked at the police gathered around his home, and showed absolutely no surprise. No panic, no attempt to run. He stood there calmly as officers put handcuffs on him. His face was completely blank. No fear, no guilt, nothing. Police sealed the house and took him in. By the next morning, Ed Gein's name was on the front page of every newspaper in the country. Photos of the farmhouse were published. The details were so horrifying that this tiny 700-person Wisconsin town suddenly became the center of the entire world's attention. Media lined up outside the house for days. Newspapers called it the House of Horror, and Ed Gein was given a name that would never leave him: the Butcher of Plainfield. The people of Plainfield couldn't believe it. How could someone who seemed so ordinary, so harmless, be capable of something so monstrous? Interrogation began. For 30 hours, Ed Gein said nothing. Then, in a strangely childlike moment, he made a request. He wanted an apple pie with cheddar cheese. When they brought it to him, he ate it happily, like a child at a birthday party. And then, just like that, he started talking. He admitted to killing Mary Hogan and Bernice Warden. He confessed that on the morning of November 16, 1957, he had walked into Bernice Warden's store, taken a .22 caliber rifle from the rack, shot her, dragged her body out, loaded it into his truck, and taken her home. He also admitted to digging up more than 9 bodies from the local cemetery, all of them women. Police suspected he had killed more. Several people from the surrounding area had gone missing over the years and were never found, including a teenage girl named Evelyn Hartley, an 8-year-old named Georgia Weckler, and 2 men named Victor Travis and Ray Burgess. Ed Gein denied all of it. There was also strong suspicion that he had killed his own brother Henry, because Henry had spoken against their mother, something Ed Gein could never tolerate. The bruises on Henry's head at the time of his death pointed in that direction, though the police had ignored them at the time. With 2 murder confessions and 9 grave robberies confirmed, Ed Gein was brought before a court. The entire country wanted to see this monster up close. But when he appeared in court, his behavior was so strange that the judge ordered a full psychiatric evaluation before any sentencing. The results stunned everyone. Ed Gein was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He genuinely believed that his dead mother spoke to him. He was also found to be suffering from necrophilia, an attraction to the dead. Based on these findings, the court declared him unfit to stand trial. The judge determined that, given his mental state, Ed Gein was incapable of understanding the weight of what he had done. He was sent to a psychiatric institution instead of prison. A few weeks later, his farmhouse, and everything inside it, was scheduled to be auctioned off. But the night before the auction, it burned to the ground under mysterious circumstances. No one ever found out who set it on fire, or why. Some people believe that the evil living within those walls had destroyed itself, reducing every last piece of evidence to ash. Ed Gein spent the next 10 years in the psychiatric institution. His behavior was generally calm, except around the full moon, when he would become delusional and start saying strange things. In 1968, doctors declared him mentally fit to stand trial in the murder of Bernice Warden. He was found guilty, but given his mental condition, he was declared not guilty by reason of insanity and was returned to the Mendota Mental Health Institute rather than sent to prison. On July 26, 1984, at the age of 77, Ed Gein died of respiratory and heart failure at the Mendota Mental Health Institute. But his shadow never left. His story went on to inspire some of the most iconic horror films ever made: Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs. In October 2025, Netflix released a series called Monster, the Ed Gein story, bringing his case to a whole new generation. Even today, in Plainfield and across America, the case of Ed Gein remains a wound that people want to forget, but simply cannot. If this story disturbed you, our next video covers the case of Cyanide Moan, a serial killer who lured innocent women into fake marriages, exploited them, and then poisoned them to death. The link is in the description.